Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw the brand new Martin Scorsese film Killers of the Flower Moon end up in the number 2 spot compared to Taylor Swift's Eras Tour, which now went into its second weekend of release, with Scorsese's film making around $44 million worldwide. And even though many of the so-called box office experts are saying, well, this film is getting rave reviews and this film is going to get a lot of awards attention, and so that means that it's going to have, strong legs down the line and it'll make a lot of money domestically. Well, here's the big problem, is that even if that is true, based off of this kind of opening with the kind of holds that they might be projecting for this movie, that still would not be nearly enough to make up for the whopping $200 million that they spent on this movie. Now, don't get me wrong, I love me some Scorsese. I think that he's made a lot of really great films. However, he has not really been on the best of roles lately. I think that when you look back to the film that he made with Netflix a few years ago, The Irishman, I felt like that film had a lot of problems with it. Even though it did still have that quality that Scorsese is known for, it also really just didn't hold up well. It's not a film that a lot of people are going back to or still talking about even still to this day. Now, you do have Leonardo DiCaprio in this movie, in addition to De Niro, who was also in The Irishman. So I think that having the Leo factor this time around could potentially make things a bit bigger. But as we all know, movie stars really don't sell movies anymore, right? It's the trailers, it's the marketing, and most importantly, it's the word of mouth. And the word of mouth on this film has been very, very good. However, it's still a 3.5-hour movie that even a huge movie buff like myself has not yet seen and probably won't be seeing in theaters simply because of the fact I've got kids. And a 3.5-hour movie is a hard film to schedule around when you have a 3-year-old and a child that just turned 4 weeks. So I imagine that there's probably a lot of other people who might be in a similar position to I am, who may not be able to actually see this film. Initially, I might have to wait for it to come out on Apple TV, whenever that might actually be. But we'll go ahead and dive into that and a plethora of other stuff. Before we get any further, please make sure you smash that like button, loud the fire button, I see, smash the rumble button as well, and also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification on. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. So Rebecca Rubin, we got Bex over on Box Office on Variety talking here about the Killers of the Flower Moon, saying Martin Scorsese's star-studded crime epic Killers of the Flower Moon impressed in its box office debut, collecting $23 million from 3,600 screens over the weekend. The film also brought in $21 million from 63 international territories for a global total of $44 million. Now again, if we're going to say, is this a good amount of money for a Scorsese film? Maybe. Are we going to say that this is a good amount of money for a 3.5-hour movie? Okay, maybe you have a stronger argument there. But to try to say that this is impressing the box office, I think is, again, a bit disingenuous. Because, as is often the case when it comes to most of these so-called experts, they usually do one of two things. They make one of two grave mistakes. One, they ignore things like inflation, and so they'll say this is the best opening for this movie in this weekend ever, or they'll say this is the highest grossing of a female-led film or a female-directed film, or of whatever category, whatever subcategory they want to put it into. And the issue with that is that it's just not really based in reality, right? $21 million internationally when you're opening in 63 international territories. What that means is this film had a worldwide release pretty much all at the same time in a variety of different countries, which means there's not going to be a case where you're waiting for a country down the road coming out for it to be able to somehow save the film. Not to mention, this is a 3.5-hour drama, and that's not the kind of movie that you're going to have a country down the road that would actually be able to save it if that was indeed the case. Instead, what you have is a decent showing for a 3.5-hour movie, but still cost $200 million. Now, they go ahead and give some comparisons here as well. It says, despite its second place finish, it's easily the best start for Scorsese since 2010's Shutter Island, which opened up to $41 million, and the third best of his career following 2006's $26.9 million debut for The Departed. Now, again, that's one of the errors that I mentioned earlier. Yes, $26.9 million back in 2006. That's worth a heck of a lot more than what the $23 million has made so far, right? Even if you were just to ignore inflation, because I know some people get triggered by that word, trigger warning, you have to at the very least say, all right, the average ticket price today is what, roughly $13 or so? Because hyperinflation has been the case, especially the last few years, but ticket prices in general have been on the rise the last decade to a crazy exponential degree, but especially, ever since COVID, it really had a huge, percentage-wise, huge increase. So you take into account $23 million domestic, at around $13 million a pop, compared to 2006's The Departed, where you're talking about what? At that point, it would have been closer to $6 a ticket or so. So not only are you seeing almost a doubling, right, meaning double the amount of people going to see a film like The Departed, it also just shows you how unimpressive these numbers actually are. And again, I think that if they're going to try to take it from the point of view of it's a 3.5-hour Martin Scorsese drama, and so therefore it's impressive that it's made this much money when so many other smaller films and so many other shorter films, in fact, that might have had similar marketing budgets or maybe even similar name recognition weren't able to get anywhere close to this, that does not automatically mean then it is actually impressive. And again, that $44 million internationally, even though this film might have legs domestically, will it actually have the same legs internationally? I don't see it, because this is a Western, right? This is an American Western, is based off of Native, like it's very much rooted in conversations on Osage, on Native Americans, and how many people outside of the United States are going to even have a knowledge of that or even care about it. They might care about Scorsese, right? I'm sure there are a plethora of people in Europe and across the world who are big, hardcore Martin Scorsese film fans, but a 3.5-hour Western, I don't know. That just doesn't seem like it's going to be a major sell. And again, did I mention the $200 million budget? Now, of course, I did want to give props to this because over at Deadline, we got to talk about Tony at the very least. As of the recording of this video, when I was looking for the article, Nance over there had not yet put her international numbers. So, hey, Becca, good job on getting on top of that first. But Tony did want to talk about Taylor Swift is still bejeweled. We have to, of course, have his cringe headlines. Still bejeweled with $32 million second weekend. Killers of the Flower Moon brings adults back to cinemas with $23 million. And again, this is, I think, the kind of narrative they're going to push is, oh, but it's the older demographic that has not been showing up for the likes of of my big fat Greek Wedding 3. They didn't show up for that movie or for many others, but they're showing up for this one. $23 million just really isn't a whole lot in comparison. And we'll show you those numbers and why it isn't really all that impressive in just a second. Let's go ahead and go to the numbers, though, and look at the domestic numbers first. So Taylor Swift, as I had predicted, it had a pretty massive drop-off. Now, this could have been a lot higher, but going into the weekend, there were many projections saying it would be the lower 60s. In fact, it ended up dropping, at least according to these numbers, 67%. So when the actuals come in on Monday or Tuesday, that might be higher. It could be lower. But again, regardless of any of that, the film is making money. The film's making a plethora of money. But as I had thought, a lot more people wanted to go see this movie opening weekend. They wanted that experience. They wanted the theater to be full, because it creates that concert-like atmosphere, whereas down the line, this is not the kind of movie that you're going to have the general moviegoer saying, oh, yeah, well, I guess not a lot of people are going, so I'll go check out the Taylor Swift Eras Tour, right? Unless you're a fan and already bought into that, you're not likely going to see that movie anyway, so this film's going to probably have some pretty hefty drop-offs for the remainder of its run, but still doing very well. $31 million coming in number one against a new release. And even though it is a 3.5-hour drama, Killers of the Flower Moon is also a Scorsese film, and so it's something that needs to be, of course, mentioned. Speaking of Killers of the Flower Moon, making $23 million, it's around $6,000 per screen. So again, pretty good numbers there. Not anywhere near what we've seen with some other movies, though. So for a 3.5-hour drama, sure, it looks fine. But in comparison to films from just a few years ago, from other films that have a similar genre or similar runtime, I don't really know how well this thing is going to be actually matching up, especially when a lot of those other films that I'm mentioning here, kind of in this ethereal realm, probably don't have $200 million budgets either. I think that's a big key really to all of this, I think, is just how much money they spend, right? If this was a movie that probably, could have cost 50 to maybe $100 million max, this would be a decent start. But when you're looking at $200 million, meaning you have to get to roughly $600 million worldwide just to break even, yeah, it's not looking good. Extras Believer, 49% drop in its third week of release, starting to bleed a few screens here, but still doing well enough. It is an October release film, and so even though I've heard some pretty terrible things about the movie, apparently enough people still have interest in going to see it. Paw Patrol coming in the number 4 spot there, $4.4 million, another 35% drop. So again, continuing to hold strong, continuing to add to its overall profits. Number 5 coming in this week. This is fun to see. The Nightmare Before Christmas. That's right. Disney's The Nightmare Before Christmas, at least being distributed by Disney at this point. $4.1 million, coming out at over 1,600 screens. Right, this film has been out for a long time. This film came out back in the 90s, was a phenomenal movie. I still love this movie so much. It's a film that is great to watch in October, great to watch in December. It's one of those weird films that's able to somehow bridge both the Halloween, era, the October feeling, and the December Christmas feeling as well. And I love when the numbers does this, when they put out there that this film has been out, has been in release, or its initial release was 1,567 weeks ago. So just to give you an idea of that, but the fact that it was this far away, right, this long ago, and yet it's in the top 5, right? So one, let's go ahead and look at these numbers and let's talk about this for a second. The number 1 film is a concert that was filmed. That is your number one movie at the box office, all right? And then your number 5 movie is a movie that came out, 20 plus years ago, right? Roughly 30 years ago at this point. So you're talking about a state of the box office where the only films in the top 5 are The Exorcist, which is a sequel, you could say, to the original film, but again, a franchise movie that is not going to be nearly enough to make up for the $400 million Universal spent to get the rights to The Exorcist. So yeah, it's doing fine independently, right, on its own as an individual movie, but you kind of got to look at it the full context of that. Paw Patrol, that's based off of a previous IP, right? It's based off of a TV series. You have then Nightmare Before Christmas. And so the only original film you really have is Killers of the Flower Moon. Right. And even that one, we could argue saying, like, how much of it is influenced by other material, or how much of it again, I don't know enough about the movie to know whether it's based off of a book or anything like that. It very well could be, for all I know. But I think that, again, what this is saying is that original ideas just either, one, aren't making a lot of money. The Creator, I think, is a great example of that. For instance, I thought it was a solid movie, that coming in the number 7 spot, but again, just one thing I wanted to point out there about the top 5. The number 6 spot went to Saw 10, right? Also continuing to add to its profits. The Creator, as I had mentioned in previous videos, 4 weeks out from its initial release, just really not making a splash anywhere, unfortunately, even though it only cost $80 million, with the kind of effects that you saw where the film looked like it could have, they could have spent so much more money on that. So again, the fact that it looked as good as it did, sad to see it's just not performing at the box office, and so again, that is looking to still be a flop. Haunting in Venice as well, a film that could have been a big October release film, but no one's going to see it. And after the last movie, I can't say I'm that surprised. I thought the marketing was clever. Apparently, the marketing did not really necessarily match the movie, because the marketing of the film definitely made it be portrayed more as like the typical stereotypical horror film, maybe trying to get that horror audience out, when everyone knows that this is the kind of movie talking about the Poirot character who is automatically going to appeal much more to an older audience who was probably either, one, turned off by the trailer and turned off by what was being presented, or just didn't have any interest because, as we've been talking about now for many, many months, the older audience and older demographics just have not been showing up. The number 9 spot went to The Nun 2, 45% drop there. So again, still a film, also 7 weeks out for initial release, still doing well. And in the top 10, so Disney has 2 movies in the top 10. What's interesting is that some of the best performing films that they've had, percentage-wise, per theater ratio-wise, have been 2 films from the 90s and not necessarily their newer releases. So Hocus Pocus came out this weekend in a special release, the 30th anniversary release. So this opened to 60% of a drop. Sorry, so this actually came out, I guess, last weekend, because I'm starting to see some percentages here. So it must have come out last week. So still, the fact that it's in the top 10 after 2 weeks of it coming back, hey, kudos to you. But Disney, maybe it's showing you maybe that's the direction you should be going in, is just re-releasing your older films and instead of, pushing out nonsense. Speaking of nonsense, Taylor Swift, the Eras Tour, and almost it kind of triggers me that this is being entered in as an all caps title. I don't know why. It just bothers me. There's just a lot of just about the title that bothers me, but even more so, I'm just not a big fan of hers. But hey, can't deny the fact, $142.3 million worldwide. Very, very impressive numbers there, and I imagine that these international numbers may not necessarily be complete at this point in time as of the recording of this video, but still, even so, you're looking at it being roughly $150 million after just a couple of weeks, costing very little money to actually, produce this movie, since it was just filming a concert. And so you're looking at massive profits for both AMC and also for the Swift family as well. Killers of the Flower Moon, right now the numbers is only reporting the $23 million made domestically. So they have not yet entered in the 21 million or so being reported from the international markets. And remember that Becca is over at Variety is reporting that, but there's still some places that are not. So this is, again, around a $44 million opening weekend for that. Exorcist Believer, $107 million. And again, it's doing fine for itself individually, but not doing much of anything for the $400 million that they still need to pay off. And again, that's not even including interest or any of the other costs that come along with it. Paw Patrol continuing to add to its profits. Nightmare Before Christmas, I had mentioned, right, $77.7 million is the entirety. Kind of insane when you think about it. This film came out in 93. And this movie only made $77 million. So I think that what the numbers has is it's the entire box office run of the movie over at Box Office Mojo. Even though Box Office Mojo drives me nuts, one of the things they do have there that I hope the numbers at some points adds is the ability to turn on original release, and then it tells you how much did it make in its first initial months of release back in 1993 versus how much has it made then, plus any re-releases, special editions, things like that. So hey, good to see more money being added to that. Saw 10, $74 million. Again, apparently there's a market for that, and they're not spending a lot of money on it. Sadly, not enough of a market for the Creator at $90 million. As you can see, right, you need to make at least 2.5 times your budget to break even, and the budget was $80 million. So 90 million is definitely nothing compared to that 80 million. Definitely not anywhere close to the 2.5 minimum that it would need. Haunting Event is $104 million. Also a film that costs way more than it should have, and it's, again, not doing anything. The Nun 2 at $262 million, continuing to add to its profits. Hocus Pocus, the entirety of its run has been $49 million, but that's, again, including all the way back to 1993. Let's go ahead and go some box office charting, because we love doing charting here over at OMB Reviews. Again, I'm tripping over myself today. I'm still trying to get back in the swing of things. By the way, thank you if you were one of the ones waiting patiently for my return after baby Sif was born. So we got Killers of the Flower Moon. It cost $200 million to make this movie. So at a 2.5 times the budget, right? That's my typical break even. That's what always has been my break even point for movies. That means it needs to make roughly $500 million, and here we're talking worldwide numbers, in order to break even, right? That's including typical marketing costs. That's including the roughly 60-40 split between studios and also between theaters. I know that there's different metrics that exist out there. Some say it's closer to 3 times the budget because the split now is closer to 50-50 because of the COVID era. And I know that Valiant Renegade, shout out to him as always, has done a lot of really good digging in on that, looking at the AMC financials and other things like it. Regardless of that, though, you're still looking at a film that needs to make, roughly $500 to $600 million to break even. I can't imagine they spent nearly as much on marketing for a movie like Killers of the Flower Moon as they would for a film like Expendables or any of the DC MCU movies, but still, you're going to spend money no matter what to market your movie, and they marketed it pretty well, right? There were trailers all over the place, and the trailers were done very effectively, and at the end of the day, it is still Scorsese, so I still have a strong desire to see the film. I just don't have the time because of family. But because of its massive budget at $44 million, which is right now the projections, at least according to Variety, that means it's around $273 to $300 million in the red. So it still needs to make a ton of money if it has any hope of breaking even. If you were then to assume, right, remember that we've done this previously, that most films tend to make 3 times their opening weekend, right? If you take the overall worldwide opening weekend and you multiply it by 3, typically that gets you the number that most films will reach, or around this, maybe an average of what most films will reach. And so if that is indeed the case with this one, right, $44 million in its opening weekend, multiply that by 3, that means that the film might be able to get to $132 million worldwide by the end of its release. Now, to the credit of people over Deadline, the so-called experts, I do think domestically, it probably will do a little bit better than your standard release, because it is clearly appealing to an older demographic, and it is going to get awards contention. And that does mean something. I think the question is, how much does it actually mean, right? This film is getting some IMAX screens, is getting some premium format screens. So the question is, how much of that is actually going to be, playing a role in the overall money that it is actually making? I'm going to go ahead and see if I can just maybe find that real quick. Again, $200 million budgeted movie represents a big, bold screen bet for Apple, which until now prioritized streaming. This marks the widest release ever for a movie backed by a streaming service. It's unclear when the film will land on Apple TV Plus, but it won't be for at least 45 days. And again, that's because of the theatrical window as it stands. I'm trying to see if they have anything listed there. Does not look like it. Sometimes Tony will bring things up like that as far as, how much of it's coming from premium format screens. It says, some might wonder, talking about the production budget there, trying to see if they've mentioned anything. Nothing that I'm seeing right now with my quick scan. But again, there's probably some money still coming from that. And so that is something that is going to be lost as the weeks go on, because it's obviously not going to be able to hold those screens, because it's just not making that much money compared to so many other films that you typically get that kind of release. So again, I think that this film is likely going to end up being a flop, but still a little too early to tell. This film would have to have some of the greatest holds ever in history. We would have to see basically Top Gun Maverick-like holds where it's dropping in the single digits or in the low double digits, right? Which is what that film was able to do domestically. And I just do not see that happening. I think that this film will probably end up having a pretty typical 40 to 60% drop in its second weekend. And if that happens, and especially if that is what the domestic market's looking like, yeah, you might have down the stretch stronger holds, but that would still mean a movie that's going to struggle to get to $100 million and is definitely going to struggle to get to $200 million, and it needs to get to $500 just to break even. So, yeah, I think Killers of the Flower Moon is probably going to end up being a flop at the very least, just looking at the budget. Again, whether there's any behind-the-scenes stuff going on of, who's going to actually be losing the money or not, I can't say, but yeah, definitely not looking great for that film. Taylor Swift, The Eras Tour. Again, after its second week of release, we can project the film's going to probably make at least $100 million in net profits. And again, this is based off of the numbers that we have reported here at $142 million after 2 weeks. Typical historical standards mean that the worst case scenario would be that it's going to be around $203 million worldwide by the end of its run, an average of $210 million with a max of being around $284 million worldwide is probably what I would have to guess the numbers would actually be. But hey, these are still very, very good, especially with a reported budget of around $20 million. And again, take that with a grain of salt. I know there's been different reports about what the budget for the film actually was. We all know it's very small, though, because the concert was already happening, and so all they had to do was just get cameras and stuff, which is still going to cost money. But hey, kudos to them for making a film making quite a bit of money. Excess Believer is now at $107 million worldwide, meaning around $19.5 million in net gain profits. So this is looking like, even though it might be, you know, a chart breaker in the opposite direction, meaning it doesn't make nearly as much as it could have made, it still has made enough because of the smaller budget. Paw Patrol continuing to add to its profits, now at $34 million in net gain profits. Probably would end up being close to the standard of around, you know, that average around 60%. And that's that percentage there is the first 2 weeks when you compare it to the total, right? Most films tend to fall in that 60% average territory, with the range being somewhere between 50 and 70% on average. And of course, it can be higher or lower, and those are chart breakers, and those are indicated by the underlying portion there. And so Paw Patrol looking like it's going to do pretty well. Saw 10, $25 million in net gain profits, also continuing to add to its, again, numbers there, looking very, very strong, very good. The Creator, even though it is having a typical release, right now, it's closer to the 70% of its first 2 weeks compared to what it is now. It's still $65 million in the red. It's very, very sad to see. It's a film that I think should have gotten a lot more attention. It might have a chance of getting to $100 million worldwide, but that still is not just it's just not going to be enough to make up for the $80 million budget, again, that you need to make up, and then add on that marketing, and then add on that the fact that they don't get 100% of the box office receipts. Dumb Money is also in a similar position. This film, again, might be doing well on paper as far as just the overall legs are concerned, right? Typically, when you talk about box office, it's kind of what, you know, Becca and kind of what Tony were trying to say about how the film's performing very well, talking about Killers of the Flower Moon, because, it's, you know, holding well in these specific markets and doing well with this audience. And so therefore, because it's just adding this money, it's doing well by proxy. It's like, well, percentages aren't everything, right? You could have a 20% hold, but if you only had a small release, of which Dumb Money did, and that's another film I really want to see, I have a better chance of seeing that than seeing Killers of the Flower Moon, because, hey, I can work out a 2-hour runtime film of something like Dumb Money. But still, $35 million in the red. It's not likely going to make that up, if I had to guess. Expendables is still a massive flop, $100+ million flop. In fact, it's starting to get abandoned by the different theater chains. Haunting of Venice is still also a flop. That's not likely going to change. The Nun 2 is getting close to $100 million in net gain profits. Very impressive numbers there. Big Fat Greek Wedding might, actually at this point, I will say it's probably going to end up being a loss. Either way, not good to be even just close to that line. And Equalizer 3, we can confirm, has indeed made money, has been able to add to its profits. But again, still definitely not anywhere close to that of the previous films. And I did want to mention also Gran Turismo. This is another film that I really liked, $19 million in the red. So even though it definitely was able to do probably better than what it should have done, probably because of some positive word of mouth for it, still just not enough. And that's kind of the current state of the box office, is that unless you have a smaller budgeted movie like The Exorcist, like Paw Patrol, like Saw 10, it's very hard to make money these days at the box office. Add to that a film like Killers of the Flower Moon at $200 million a pop, or $200 million for the actual movie, and then the fact that you have the massive $13 average, roughly $13 a ticket average across our country, and add to that as well just the $44 million opening weekend. Yeah, this movie is not doing nearly as well as I think some are trying to indicate that it is, and if I had to guess right now, I would say there's a good chance it'll end up being a flop. This could still be a contender at the box office, or sorry, a contender at the Oscars or the award shows, but hey, the award shows just don't matter. They haven't mattered for a long time, and they matter even less now, right? The older demographics that might care about that are such a small portion of the movie-going audience these days. They're not enough to will things over, right? One of the reasons why Top Gun Maverick last year was able to do as well as it did was not because it got that older demographic out, it's because it also got out all of the other ones. And that's something that these other movies just don't have the capacity of doing, or they're just not doing it, right? They're able to get some people from some of these demographics out, but the one that would typically be their dominant supporting force, like the older demographic, they're just not big in numbers, and they're just not coming out in the way that they used to be able to come out for different films. But these are the numbers as they stand. What are your thoughts? Do you think Killers of the Flower Moon was any good? Do you think it deserves your money? And again, it's a film that I have a lot of interest in. I like a lot of the actors that are involved in the film, and I think that it could be really, really good. I've heard some very good things about it as well. So as long as it's better than The Irishman from Scorsese, then I'll be happy, because I would love to see a film that's really good from him and not have the last film that I've watched from him be a film like The Irishman. So let me know your thoughts about that, and also if you think it's going to have any chance of breaking even. I just don't see it. I just don't think it's a possibility at this point in time. Also, thoughts on the Eras Tour. Again, it's pretty much done, I think, making the bulk of its money. 67% drop there domestically. It's primarily a domestic release. I would not be surprised to see the film have another massive drop off next weekend, because it's not the kind of movie, as a concert movie, it's not the kind of film that you're going to have that down the road and down the stretch money with. And I think that we're kind of already seeing that with the kind of drop it has. And any other films, also let me know your thoughts about that, and anything I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you want to follow the box office charting, I should be able to upload an update, I should say, the box office charting over at my website, ombreviews.com. And please make sure that you smash that like button. A lot of the fun about I've seen smash the rumble button as well. This has always been fun. And by the way, there is, if anyone's been wondering, why I'm not getting the box office update on both Geeks and Gamers, the kind of usually the shorter one, and the one over here, is because Geeks and Gamers we're trying to do different things over there right now, and so because of that, we're putting a halt on box office breakdown just because of algorithm and things like that. So just again, keep in mind that if anyone is asking about that, if you see anyone on Geeks and Gamers or anywhere else say, hey, where is this? Point them over here and say, oh, you'll still get the box office breakdown. You'll in fact get even more detailed box office breakdown on Odin's channel. So go check me out here. OMB Reviews. Again, support me on all the other platforms. You guys seriously are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members: Father Luca Illich, Laura, the Mother Major General's Story, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel by the name Eagle Rider, Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name. Also to Matt317, check out his Twitch channel of the same name. Mr. Roy and ZK-Man, check him out over at xtheboundaries.co. Thank you very much for being my Chosen members this month, and if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, also access to a podcast, access to a giveaways channel, and tons of other stuff, go check out to be a member today in the links in the video description below. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless.